Welcome ladies and gents, ChrisAndre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter, or of course you can subscribe to the channel Let's Talk Boxing. As always, we will delve deeply into a couple of stories here and try to read between the lines, but I also want to bring you guys a bunch of little news stories that I find really interesting. So it's almost like a weekly roundup type of episode this week, and we'll start off discussing the fact that Big George Foreman, the movie, is being released on April the 28th and the trailer is out. You guys have got to check this out on YouTube. It looks superb. If you can't convince the missus to go with you to watch a boxing movie, you got to lie to her. Tell her Big George worked as a foreman on a construction site. He couldn't meet the woman of his dreams, and it's about his trials and tribulations in life. By the time she's halfway through her popcorn, her drink, and the penny sweets that you're going to have to dig deep into the pocket to buy for her, it'll be too late. She'll be banging to the movie, and it will be quality because it looks so poignant, and you can thank me later. That's the way to get down to the cinema and watch Big George Foreman. Trust me on that. Moving on from that, The Crusher versus The Rock. The WBC has mandated Sergey Kovalev to fight Mchunu for the Cruiserweight title eliminator position. The winner would face Ilunga Makabu. Moving on from that, let's talk about Eddie Hearn and an interview he's given with ID Boxing. He's basically undermined massively the British Board of Boxing Control, and it's almost as though he's mocking them. This is becoming quite a dirty battle, in my opinion. Now I'm going to read you a little excerpt of this video, some comments from Eddie Hearn, and I'll be interjecting as I go along, and I'll be telling you when I'm doing so, because some of these things deserve an interjection, to be honest with you. So Eddie Hearn came out and he said, I'm angry at the British Board of Boxing Control because Robert Smith is coming out and saying we're waiting on this and we're waiting on that. Ultimately, what we're going to deal with is the people who conducted the tests and the people who govern the tests, the WBC and VADA. Nothing to do with the British Board of Boxing Control. Conor Benn is not licensed by them. So here comes the first interjection. What are you talking about, Eddie? At the time that Conor Benn failed the test, he was licensed by the British Board of Boxing Control. Just because Conor Benn does not want to renew that now, a cynic might say it's not because he's really upset at the British Board and the way they've conducted themselves, but it was precisely for this reason, to attempt to handicap them when they want to investigate, for you to be able to bypass them, to be able to exert influence. That's what a cynic would say. Potentially to be able to exert influence elsewhere, and therefore if the WBC give him a pass, he's able to carry on as normal as though nothing happened. He goes on to say, now if they want to investigate after this hearing, no problem at all. They've never asked us for anything. Now that last bit is significant. He's claiming that Robert Smith has not asked them for whatever it is that they're waiting on, this 270-page document. Now that is something that would need clarification, and one would hope that the British Board would be interviewed by the press in order to get this information. Eddie Hearn goes on to say, when these tests occurred, the British Board were made aware of these tests at exactly the same time as us. Contractually, in this situation, the British Board will be relied on to decide whether to sanction the fight or not. It took them 5 weeks to decide whether they would sanction this fight. 3 days before the fight, and £1 million deep in for me, they decided they weren't going to sanction the fight. I got the entire blame. But if they wouldn't have sanctioned the fight when the tests were reported, none of this would have ever happened. But no members of the media who are speaking to Robert Smith are asking why did it take so long. Well, he'll probably say, it took time to gather the information, but at the end of the day, contractually, we rely on the board to decide whether a fight's going to be sanctioned. Now, in this particular point, Eddie Hearn may have a point, but there is a potential contrasting argument to that. And that is that perhaps it took them 5 weeks to investigate. So when they first got the information, they might have taken a period of time to consider the information that they had at their disposal. And they listened to the explanations, they discussed it, and then 3 days before the fight, they decided, nope, this cannot go ahead. Now, I do think that that is unlikely. I'm just putting it out there. I think what was more likely, and this is just me looking in from the outside, I have no inside information, but what looked more likely to me is that when the news story broke, the British Board panicked. They tried to cover their backs, essentially. They thought, no, we can't go ahead with this, so we need to appear to be doing the right thing. Let's cancel the fight. And Eddie Hearn, who, as he claims, had invested an extra $1 million in between point A, when the tests were available, and point B, where the board decided to cancel the fight, he's rightly fuming about that. But if that story hadn't broken and the fight had gone ahead, I'm sure Eddie Hearn would not have been complaining. In other words, it was a gamble. It was a gamble that was taken by all involved. But because the story was leaked by whoever and there was a backlash, that's clearly led now to some infighting. Moving on to the next bit of Eddie Hearn's little excerpt here, little monologue. He says, now they're saying we want to investigate it. Well, now you investigate it after the people that matter investigate it. And when you do, you might be in a very difficult position because of the ruling that's about to take place. Maybe. And he says that last little maybe with a smug little look on his face. It's almost as though he's now throwing it in the face of the British board. Since you tried to turn on us and you acted in this way, we have now made you powerless. So now you're going to be in a difficult position, aren't you, Robert Smith? Now that you're going to want to investigate it after Conor Benn is allowed to carry on fighting, well, he's going to go ahead and carry on fighting regardless of what you say. And worst case scenario, he's not going to be with the British board anymore. So you're missing out on a nice little paycheck there. And this is a problem for me. I'm not saying that Eddie Hearn's wrong about the conduct of the British Board of Boxing Control. However, it's almost as though promoters are exerting a little bit too much power now. If they're able essentially to threaten the board about, money that they're going to miss out on, that's how it's coming across to me. Again, I could be wrong. But if they're able to make the board powerless, well, then it starts to have other ramifications, does it not? Let me know how you're interpreting this situation regarding Eddie Hearn and Conor Benn, and also the British Board of Boxing Control, and how you think it will play out, and who you think from a moral perspective, if anyone, actually has a leg to stand on. Moving on from Eddie Hearn, David Benavidez got very aggressive today with CalebPlant at the press conference. And a lot of people on my timeline are saying that he's going to absolutely smoke CalebPlant, and they're directly referring to this press conference. Now, CalebPlant was silent for much of it. He was almost trying to diffuse the aggression of David Benavidez. Now, was this stoicism? Him just being calm and just almost underplaying the severity of what David Benavidez was trying to do in order to undermine the impact that a threatening behavior could have? Or, as some people are suggesting, was he afraid? Was he shook? Was he worried about the way Benavidez and his family were acting? I mean, Jose Benavidez, the father, was acting in a way that was really unusual to me. I mean, he's a trainer, he's not a fighter, and he was talking about, we're going to send this guy to the hospital. He was getting very aggressive. Breadman, Stephen Edwards, the trainer of CalebPlant, he was a lot more passive, kept things classy, to be honest with you. It's just two very different camps at the moment in the way they're conducting the image that they want to portray. What do you think this is about? Is CalebPlant intimidated? Or is it a case of him remaining stoic and trying to undermine David Benavidez? Or is he just trying not to exert excess unnecessary energy? There are a few people that I've seen on Twitter as well talking about how David Benavidez is... these are just accusations, right? Let's just get that clear. But that David Benavidez is connected with some sort of street gang out there, and as a result of that, perhaps CalebPlant's worried about what could occur away from boxing. Obviously, that's not something you ever want to be talking about or thinking about. That could be possible, and I doubt it, to be honest with you. Their emotions are running high. I don't think it's going to spill over because these two are going to have a fight. But CalebPlant was talking about the fact how it's become personal because they started to talk about his daughter and his family. So CalebPlant wasn't exactly cowering, but he wasn't biting up at all to any of the aggression. And that's not something we usually see from CalebPlant. He was biting up when Canelo was trying to put it on him. He was biting up when Anthony Durrell was trying to put it on him. Has he just learned lessons? Stogie Hoagie, somebody from Twitter, wrote to me to say last time Plant lost his cool at a press conference, he caught a Canelo left hook. So maybe he wasn't looking for that again. And maybe that's what the consideration is here, that he's somehow been humbled. Let me know how you interpreted this press conference. It's not really a CalebPlant I've seen before, but by the same token, I don't think that being passive in that moment and not reacting is necessarily a sign of fear. It could be that you are downplaying the impact of the other person's aggression, or it could just be that he's not affecting you at all, and you're just not rattled and you're not in the mood for confrontation in that particular moment. Let me know what you think about that. Moving on from that, ShaneMcGuigan and Lawrence Okolie have split. They have both confirmed this. Lawrence Okolie was basically saying that there were no hard feelings, that it was an issue of logistics essentially. He's out in Dubai a lot, he's traveling a lot. He also though did refer to the fact that McGuigan is a great trainer, but there are other top fighters in that gym, and that he has to consider the potential of them fighting one day. People like Chris Billam-Smith, who he says is a real gentleman. It's not a real rivalry, but a fight is a possibility, even though he considers him a friend. One thing about Okolie, he does seem very ruthless. If he needs to cut out a trainer, if he needs to cut out a promoter, if he needs to do something to further his career, he will do it. He is very, very focused on success. And if he feels as though he needs to step away to maximize his chances of creating a gap between himself and his fellow gym mates, that's something he's going to be willing to do. And we know that Philip Smith is very, very close with ShaneMcGuigan on a personal level. So there could be an issue here of trust as well. Not that he expects sabotage or anything like that, but he actually explained that he felt that it would be a 60-40 fight in his favour if he was to fight Chris Smith. And he says Chris Smith is capable on his day of beating anybody. Now, I've always felt that maybe the gap between them would have been a little bit bigger in the eyes of Lawrence Okolie. So if he feels that the gap has closed somewhat in that regard, well, then you could explain why he might feel a need to make a move. Now, ShaneMcGuigan himself said there was no hard feelings, but again, logistical issues right there, and that Lawrence Okolie will beat David Light no problem. He'll knock him out in a few rounds, but that ultimately he knows that he won't just be able to go it alone. He does need to find a proper trainer to train him and prepare him and things like that. So they're both talking as though there's no hard feelings between them. But I wonder, let me know what you think about the possible reasons for this split. Are they both being honest, or is there something else between the lines that we should be reading into? Maybe something I've mentioned, or maybe something I've missed out on. Let me know. And talking about ShaneMcGuigan, he's gone in on RoyJonesJr. He did it in his usual, very polite way, but it's still going in on him. He basically came out and he said that EubankJr needs to get away from RoyJonesJr. He said there's a level of authority that Eubank needs, and a stiffness of his shots, and a tightness of his guard. He would punch through the target in the past, and he wouldn't be loose on exits. He needs to get back to that. Now, to say you've got to get yourself away from RoyJonesJr, who he does say I loved as a fighter, but to then say he needs a level of authority, it's almost as though he's saying that RoyJonesJr is passive, like he's not able to command the respect of EubankJr by then talking about the sort of stiffness of shots that he needs to throw and the guard that he needs to use and how his exits were better. Well, that's just basically undermining the teachings, the tutoring of Roy Jones, and essentially implying that EubankJr has regressed. Do you think this is true, or was it just the case of him having a bad night against Liam Smith? Maybe he was drained, maybe the difficulty in making the weights for the Conor Benn fight, and then for this fight there was an accumulation there. His resistance had gone, and up to that point you saw it as him winning the fight, and if he was still able to take the shots he used to take, he would have come out on top. Or do you agree with ShaneMcGuigan that the link up with Roy Jones just isn't right for Eubank, and he's not the same fighter that he used to be, but he could get back to that with the right trainer? And do you also think perhaps it's disrespectful for a trainer to speak like that about another trainer, saying you need to sack your trainer? Now, on the one hand, I really enjoy the fact that ShaneMcGuigan's able to be so open and honest. But if you were Roy Jones, how would you interpret this? Would you see it as a sign of professional disrespect? Or would you just look down on somebody like ShaneMcGuigan and think to yourself, I've been to areas of the game professionally that this guy could only dream of, and the reason I've been there is because of my tactical nous as well as my athleticism. It's not just that, the way people make out. I also know what I'm talking about, and I know a lot more than him. Let me know how you would interpret it if you were Roy Jones, and let me know whether you think these sorts of things could potentially influence the mindset of EubankJr. Let me know what you think about all that we've spoken about, ladies and gents. Please don't forget to hit a stiff jab on the like button, a right cross on the subscribe button, and an uppercut on the notifications button. Thanks for watching. Chat to you soon. Take care. God bless.